Hello and welcome. Today I will be speaking about the Pastoral and the Tempest piano sonatas of Ludwig van Beethoven. In my expose, I will be making references to visual arts and literature which were directly inspired by the Tempest and Pastoral Sonata. And I hope to uncover new sights into these works and their genesis, as well as to explore the intricacies of the man behind the music. So Beethoven is one of the giants of our time. His Ode to Joy, set to a poem by Schiller, had been chosen as the European anthem because of the universality of the humanitarian message. We know him as an anti-establishment revolutionary artist, a nature lover, a child of the Enlightenment, a pianist of epic proportions, a hero for the ages and having to live with a disability which meant that he could not hear with his ears that which his mind was creating. And all the while, his music, for all its radical discoveries and sonic revelations, evolved to embody the summation of the classical Viennese tradition. So the Pastoral Sonata and the Tempest Sonata are both sonatas directly in the mid-range of his output. So sonata number 15 is the Pastoral Sonata and sonata number 17 is the Tempest Sonata. They are also known by their opus numbers: Pastoral Sonata opus 28 and the Tempest Sonata opus 31 number 2. So from the 32 piano sonatas, we can see that they cut right in between on both sides of his output. And this is in the year 1802, written around the time of the famous Heiligenstadt Testament, Beethoven's most well-known statement on fate, and a spiritual reckoning on the state of his impending deafness. The letter, addressed to his brothers and perhaps posterity, was discovered after his death. It is the key to understanding his path from shame to despair to determination as he lost his hearing. In it, he described his terror of being discovered and his anguish at losing his hearing. He says, quote, how could I admit an infirmity in the one sense which ought to be more perfect in me than in others? Such incidents drove me almost to despair. A little more and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back." End quote. So the trauma of hearing loss in a contemporary context is exemplified in the Oscar-nominated film for this current season, 2021, called The Sound of Metal. And it would be interesting to see this movie just to become familiar with the trauma of such an infirmity faced by Beethoven. So what I propose is a comparison of the dualities represented between the Tempest Sonata and the Pastoral Sonata, placed alongside the two symphonies which were premiered at the famous Academy concert of 1808, which Beethoven himself conducted: the Symphony No. 6, also known as the Pastorale, and the famous Symphony No. 5, with the Fate motive. Ta-ta-ta-tam. So those two symphonies, composed within the same period, are worlds apart, a symphonic yin and yang, so to speak, a representation of the fundamental Greek dialectic in which the elements of Apollyon beauty are in balance with Dionysian ecstasy. So in addition to these two symphonies, this Academy concert also saw the premieres of Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto, his Choral Fantasy, as well as selections from his C major Mass. So it was an epic concert at the Theater an der Wien, and the last time Beethoven would perform one of his piano concertos in public. The Pastoral Symphony is attributed to Beethoven's love of nature, and the rediscovery of nature in Beethoven's day had led to a revival of paganism and pantheism. The rational deism of Voltaire had been strangely concocted with the emotional primitivism of Rousseau. The artists of the Romantic period and the French Enlightenment made a call for a return to nature. The spirituality in the pastoral works of the symphony and the sonata are very different from the spirituality of later works, which feature a struggle and redemption dialectic, or a spirituality of catharsis by way of tragedy to apotheosis, or in some cases a resistance to submission. So here in the pastoral works, we have a spirituality of wonder, of thankfulness, a quest for the divine spirit in nature, a pantheistic message. It is interesting to see the influence of this Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. It was such a powerful source of inspiration and a point of reference for exponents of Viennese modernism fighting for renewal and recognition in the fin de siècle visual arts, including in Secessionism and Art Nouveau. The Pastoral Symphony inspired the Viennese Jugendstil artist and Gustav Klimt colleague, Josef Maria Auchentaller, to create a series of 5 paintings, each painting representing movement. So this is the first artistic realization of all movements of a Beethoven symphony put to art. And the first movement we can see here is the dance of the Elves, according to Josef Maria Auchentaller, and is based on the first movement of the Pastoral Symphony of Beethoven. You can find it in the Leopold Museum in Vienna. If we jump ahead to the New World now, and particularly here in Canada, where I am from, we can see that the composition by Thompson called The West Wind from 1917 absorbs the influence of Art Nouveau with its flat and simplified images, with special emphasis on the serpentine linear element used to express forms in nature, and a sort of arabesque, thus making a connection with European art at the turn of the century. Thompson was integral to the formation of a group of Canadian artists known as the Group of Seven. These artists, like Beethoven, believed that nature was more than simply a visual feast of form and color, and sought in their work to regard nature as a powerful spiritual force, which might be comprehended through prolonged contemplation and compelled to yield its store of higher truths. This is the same quality Beethoven wanted to bring out in the Pastoral Symphony. He made an amendment under the title in his manuscript, stating, quote, "It is more of an expression of feeling than tone painting," unquote. Mehr Empfindlichkeit als Tonmalerei. Another famous Canadian icon, Emily Carr, from the West Coast, was a very famous painter known for her landscape paintings and forest scenes, although she rose to prominence after being discovered for her paintings of West Coast Aboriginal art. Here in this piece called The Red Cedar from 1931, we can see the vibrant colors inspired by Fauvism, which she witnessed while a student in France at the turn of the century. A famous quote by Beethoven, "I love a tree more than a man," taken from Romain Rolland's essay on Beethoven, capturing the idyllic image of a man most at ease when vacationing at the countryside, where he could take long solitary walks through fields and woods. This is exactly the man that we see captured in the Pastoral Symphony and Pastoral Sonata. The idea of Waldeinsamkeit, solitude of the forest. It is an intrinsic word to the German language. The idea of meditation and philosophical oneness with nature, deeply ingrained in the psyche of Germany, now taking on a new meaning because of the coronavirus pandemic. Returning back to the Pastoral Sonata, Composed in the rustic resort and hillside village on the outskirts of Vienna, Heiligenstadt, it was dedicated to Baron Josef van Sonnenfels, who, like Beethoven, was committed to Enlightenment ideals. At the center of Beethoven's output around 1801 were the Second Symphony, the ballet music for Creatures of Prometheus, the String Quintet Opus 29, the Spring Sonata for violin and piano, Opus 24, the Serenade for flute, violin, and viola, Opus 25, and no fewer than 4 piano sonatas from Opus 26, Opus 27 number 1, Opus 27 number 2, and the Pastorale, Opus 28. So the famous Moonlight Sonata, Opus 27 number 2, is immediately preceding the Pastoral Sonata. On the whole, and contrary to the dramatic fury of the final movement of the Moonlight Sonata, the Pastorale is calm and a reflective sonata, and Beethoven reverted for the last time in his life to the normal 4-movement sonata form with a slow second movement. Like the Moonlight, the name Pastorale is not attributed to Beethoven, but pastoral elements prevail. Pedal points, drone-like intervals mimicking bagpipes, triple meter, and a cadential theme. In his book from 1842, Carl Czerny, the famous pupil of Beethoven, called the 4th movement in particular a cheerful pastorale, playful and good-humored. Indeed, all movements and the sonata as a whole look forward to the Pastoral Symphony of 6 years later. There are a few explicit references to nature in the bird calls in the end of the 2nd movement of the symphony, imitated by the orchestral instruments, and one can imagine a similar impression at the end of the 2nd movement of the Pastoral Sonata. During the early months of 1801, immediately before the sonata, Beethoven had composed an orchestral movement entitled Pastorale within the ballet music to the Creatures of Prometheus, Die Geschöpfe des Prometheus, Opus 43, and may have consciously drawn on this movement in the Opus 28 Pastoral Sonata. Coincidentally, the only other movement with a title in the ballet is the second part of the introduction, which is called Tempesta, or Tempest. The ballet is an allegory based on the mythical story of Prometheus, who stole fire from Zeus in order to create mankind from clay. Prometheus finds mankind in a state of ignorance and decides to introduce the ideas of science and art to them. Prometheus takes his creatures to Parnassus to receive instruction from Apollo, god of the arts, who commands Orpheus to teach them music, and also Pan, who introduces them to the pastoral dance. In this painting by Christian Griepenkerl of 1877, part of a cycle on the myth of Prometheus, we can see Prometheus watching as Athena endows his creation with reason. Going on, and we ask ourselves, what is a sonata? I would like to take a few definitions from Alfred Brendel's famous book, Musical Thoughts and Afterthoughts, where he states 3 definitions. Number 1, it's an instrumental piece as opposed to a vocal cantata. Number 2, a cyclical work of 2 or more movements without being a suite. And then number 3, exemplifying the ideas of a sonata form, an exhibition with a principal theme followed by 1 or more subsidiary themes in the dominant or mediant, a development, a recapitulation in which the subsidiary theme returns to tonic, and a coda. Obviously, this is an oversimplification, but these were the general ideas of a sonata form, and it has evolved significantly with Beethoven and beyond. The great Beethoven scholar Francis Tovey defines a sonata as essentially a dramatic art form combining the emotional range and vivid presentation of a full-sized stage drama with the tension of a short story. And one Abbe Pluche from 1732 states that sonatas are like studies of several mental attitudes and passions of man. On this 250th anniversary that we just marked of Beethoven, there is a moment and a movement to revitalize Beethoven's love for nature, to make it more tangible. Beethoven's Pastorale is not only concerned about depictions of nature as a place of refuge, but also with the reciprocal relationship between humans and nature. In this spirit, the music invites artists to address the issues of nature and the environment. The Beethoven Pastoral project is a new movement, and it is a starting point of a worldwide idea to mobilize artists to bring awareness to climate protection in the 21st century. If you'd like to get familiarized with this movement, please have a look at www.pastoralproject.org.